The Maamar we're going to learn today, beginning with the words Vayehi, Beshalach Parei, was delivered by the Rebbe on Shabbos Tu B'Shvat. And the year was 1987. It was like January 1987. So the Maamar opens with the words of this week's Torah portion, Vayehi Beshalach Parei Esam. The parsha opens, it came to pass when the Pharaoh sent the nation out of the land of Mitzrayim. It's explained in the Torah, which is also called the Chassidish Parsha. And the Maimarim that follow subsequently, Maimarim of the Mittler Rebbe, afterwards of the Tzemach Tzedek. Dehine al Yisrael begolus Mitzrayim ksiv. With regard to the Jewish people in the Egyptian exile, it's written, V'zorati li ba'aretz. So this is a pasuk from the prophet Hosea, who has numerous references to agriculture and planting and the Jewish people. And he says, I planted them in the land. I planted for me in the land. Our sages tell us in the Gemara in Maseches Pesachim, Adam zeirei kur, a person plants a measure. It's called a kav. Kur, a kav, a measure. Lahoitzi kama kurim. So you plant a fistful and you take out many fistfuls. A small measure of planting results in a lot of growth. That's the nature of planting. So since that's the nature of planting, when we're talking about soil and seeds on a very literal level, so al derech zeh, similarly it's also b'inyan hazriya the Yisrael. If the Jewish people are planted, so then the same thing would have to apply. So the Jewish people are planted, so to speak, proverbially, in Golus Mitzrayim. And after we're planted in Golus Mitzrayim, the result is much, much more. Much more comes out than when we went in. The Rebbe quickly points out this is not a Mitzrayim, an Egyptian phenomenon, but rather, V'chein b'sha'or ha'golius. It's true that in Egypt they had success agriculturally when all other countries didn't. And that's because of the Nile Delta, and the artificial irrigation, that even though they don't have rainfall, that's true. But nonetheless, the metaphor here is not unique to Egypt. The metaphor, in fact, applies to every Golus. The Chol HaMalchias, because all dominion, and dominion here refers to Golus, these are foreign powers that dominate our people, and exile and displace our people. They're all Nikru al Shem Mitzrayim. They're all referred to in the image or the name of Egypt, of Mitzrayim in Hebrew. And the reason is, Al Shem Shehem Mitzidon Li Yisrael. So it's interesting, here the Rebbe doesn't talk about because Mitzrayim, out of the terminology of Meitzer or Gvul, of limitation, because the truth is that limitation also exists in Kedusha. There's a Mitzrayim of Kedusha. Mitzrayim of Kedusha means when a person says, I have an hour to daven, not one more minute. I'm gone after that, that's it. That's Mitzrayim. You're stuck, you put yourself in a box. It's Kedusha, you didn't do any Avedas, nobody's tormenting you. You just limited yourself. You think that you have to fit in this frame and you can't go beyond that. But here we're speaking specifically about Golus. And therefore, the Rebbe invokes not the notion of Mitzrayim, Meloshin, from the language, Meitzer Ugvul, but here, the Rebbe invokes the Bereshis Rabbah that says that it's called by Mitzrayim because the word Mitzrayim not only means narrow straits, but it also shares a common root with the word tsar, which means pain. Now, it's not mutually exclusive. Narrow straits are painful. And if you try to put on a pair of shoes that's too small on you, you find out what it means pain. It's not comfortable. So when you try to force something into a tight spot, it's painful. But nonetheless, the emphasis here is Shem Mitzidon Li Yisrael, because they cause pain for the nation of Israel. So why is that? What is the point of tormenting us? Why have pain? Take an aspirin, no point in suffering. So the answer is that, that's not so simple. There's no quick pill. There's no way to get past this fast. The suffering, the anguish, the discomfort. Shahu b'shvil hatesefes v'haribui v'ha'aliyah. This is because there's an addition. This is because there's an increase. This is because we're talking about an elevation. And this is achieved, shena'asis al yedei ha'golus. This happens through the golus. So it's through the pain that the growth comes. It's when the seed dissolves in the ground, and it's not looking very pretty, that's when the seed is able to seed growth and have enormous dividends. Which brings us back to the opening of the Maimer. Beshalach. This is the notion of what Pharaoh sent a nation. When the Jewish people went down into Mitzrayim, which is the euphemistic Vizarati, I planted. Hayurak shivim nefesh. There were only 70 souls. So in the metaphor, kur, a small measure. Afterwards, however, when we pick it up in the next narrative, Al Yedei Golus Mitzrayim, through the torment and the suffering, through the exile and displacement of Mitzrayim, then we had Beshalach Parei Esa'am. Now the Pharaoh was sending the nation. Hayu bebechinas toisefes veribu v'aliyah. The nation he sent was not the nation that came into Mitzrayim. It wasn't as if we managed to survive. We came as 70 people. We got bludgeoned and beaten and tormented for 2 years, but we left with 70 people. We still maintained our numbers. No. It was way, way beyond. An enormous increase that took place. In those 2 centuries, we went from being a tiny family, or if you want, a large nuclear family, and we went to becoming a large nation. Kama kurim, many measures. Like it says after the opening of our Maimer, the pasuk a little bit later, a few verses later says, Uvnei Yisrael yetzim biyad Rama. The Jewish people, not a family, this was a triumphant nation that left Mitzrayim. The Tmud hazeh shebetchilas hayiridah leMitzrayim, that in the stead of the way they came into Mitzrayim, when it says the expression, even before they came into Mitzrayim, just when the Shvatim are standing in front of Yosef, and they're talking about this initial brush with Mitzrayim, it says, Yored Yoradnu. It doesn't say we came down to Egypt. It says we came down twice. We've come really low. Yored Yoradnu. A Yerida lamata mi Yerida. We went down, and then we went down from there. And then, when we leave Mitzrayim, the leaving of Mitzrayim is on the highest level. Hashem says that I will bring you up, but he doesn't just say I will bring you up. When he promises Yaakov that I will bring the children of Israel up, he says I'll bring them up. I'll bring them up, will I bring them up? Right? There's like a big deal here. So this is where it's captured in the biblical prose, the idea of how we go into Mitzrayim. Yored Yoradnu. The Torah doesn't spare words, and the Torah doesn't use any extra words. Everything is exact. It doesn't say Yorad. It says Yored Yoradnu. And Olcha Gam Ole. When Hashem promises Yaakov Avinu, it doesn't just say I'll take you out of here. There's this emphasis on a tremendous acceleration, a great move forward. V'zeu gam inyan b'shalach parei. Okay, back to the pasuk of our Maimer. So everything we just said now, that Golus represents a descent. It's a descent for an appropriate ascent that follows. That all of this is in some way captured in the opening verse of the Parsha where it says, and the Pharaoh sent the nation away. Listen to this. And I wanted to tell you that usually in most places, in Chassidus, and not in the Chassidic thought, usually going back even to Midrashic origins, Vayehi Beshalach Parei is seen as a negative. It's not seen as a positive light. The Gemara says that whenever it says Vayehi is Lashon Tsar, and the Gemara questions whether Vayehi Beshalach Parei has different answers. Many of the answers have something to do with the people thought the Pharaoh was sending them. This is a negative. But the Rebbe, in this Maimer, views it entirely in a positive light. And he says, Ayedei hayerida lebechinas parei. When they went down to Mitzrayim, it wasn't just a country. They were under the thumb of the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh, he was the king of atheists. He was the atheist of all atheists. Not only he didn't believe in God, he thought he was God. So they were under, so to speak, the Pharaoh of L'umazeh, the Pharaoh of the extreme klipa, of extreme darkness. And from this we come to the highest level in Parei. Now fasten your seatbelts, because this is going to be really strange. We're going to hear about an expression, a Zoharic expression, which superficially will make absolutely no sense to you whatsoever. That the name Parei, from a mystical, Kabbalistic perspective, is Miloshoin Bei Ispariu Kol Nahoirin Eloin. It is here in it, meaning in the Pharaoh's locale, in the Pharaoh's residence, that the greatest revelation takes place. The highest revelations. The term priya means to reveal, to pull back, like in a bris milah, there's a priya. Priya means to tear open, to rip open, to reveal an entire. So the Pharaoh represents the highest levels of revelation. Now, I have always struggled with this. I don't know what that means. How does the Pharaoh become the greatest revelation, right? The Pharaoh is the greatest darkness. So it probably, I happened to have the privilege of speaking to some very, very wise people yesterday, and I asked them about this because I don't understand it. I said, like, it has to make sense, like on some literal level. It's got, like, they said, well, Torah talks on a high level. I said, I understand, but on a high level, it has to translate into a lower level. Like, how do you make sense out of this? So the suggestions were something like, in order for somebody to come very low, it has to have a very high source. Only the highest of the high can go to the lowest of the low. Or the metaphor in Kabbalah where when the wall collapses, the stones that were on the very highest level will fall furthest away and become most damaged. Or maybe it's the idea that we know that our world comes from the deepest level of divinity, because only in our world is it possible to deny God altogether. Our world actually thinks it's independent, solo, by ourselves. And all levels of divinity sense that there's a cause and effect before them, but then there's the cause of all causes, which obviously has nothing to rely on. That is actually real independence, and our world is a reflection of that. So, in the image of one of these ways, the point is that the Pharaoh, who represents the lowest form of a human being who is so depraved, so deranged, so sick with his ego, with his arrogance, that he thinks he's God, that he doesn't wince or blink an eye at the notion of slaughtering babies to bathe in their blood. That makes sense to him. That's fine. They're here to serve me. Everything's here to serve me. That this has to come from some very, very lofty origin. And therefore, the heavenly Pharaoh, if you will, or the source of the Pharaoh, has to be where all revelation takes place. So there's this link from the highest level to the lowest level. And here is the point that Rebbe makes in this Maamer. Invoking this Zohar, the Rebbe wants to suggest that Vayehi Beshalach Parei Sa'am is a tremendous moment, a moment where the Pharaoh's source is being revealed. That instead of the Pharaoh being the one to enslave the Jewish people, not only the Pharaoh doesn't step aside and say, okay, I can't stop you, you do as you please. No, Vayehi Beshalach Parei. The Pharaoh is, how can I help you go? In other words, the Pharaoh becomes part of the redemptive process. And in this way, the source of the Pharaoh is revealed, because everything has a godly source. So imagine, if you will, that the greatest tormentor of the Jewish people becomes the one who helps the most. Well, a Pharaoh being forced to do it doesn't, I'm not giving the Pharaoh credit, but it still represents the concept of the Pharaoh being totally transformed. You know what maybe this is like? Where by Esther, she takes over Haman's house, and Haman's house becomes the house of Mordechai and Esther. It becomes a yeshiva, it becomes a shul. It's like taking the house of Hitler and turning it into a cheder. That would be like...
Is it similar to when Pharaoh and his army are coming to kill the Jews? Hashem says, "I'll be glorified through them."
No, so glorified through them is through their destruction. Right. Okay. But the Pharaoh, it's actually not just a skafia, it's not just crushing, it's his hapcha, it's transformation.
Okay. So we had.
Yeah.
Did Pharaoh become Ufaratzta?
No, Pharaoh becomes Ispariu ba Kal Nahidin. Ispariu and Ufaratzta not the same thing. Ufaratzta means explode, to explode.
So he didn't.
I don't know. It doesn't say Ufaratzta, but the Zohar says that Pharaoh, the name Pharaoh, in the highest source is Ispariu. Ispariu means to reveal. So the greatest concealment becomes a force of revelation. It sounds like Ufaratzta, but it's not the same word.
Yeah, but maybe we had a hint of that because the last parsha says, Bol Paro, come to Pharaoh.
Right.
It didn't say, Moshe, go to Pharaoh.
Right.
So we knew there was something there waiting.
Right. And God says to Moshe, I'm going with you. The Zohar says, Adarim b'teich Adarim, he was afraid to go, right? Yeah. So there was something to be found there. In other words, there was the highest sparks. The highest sparks were there. Now, I mean, the Pharaoh, the physical Pharaoh, the material Pharaoh, the actual Pharaoh is still a monster, a horrible guy. And by the way, after Beshalach Parei Sa'am, he changes his mind. And he changes the mind of the whole nation. And he gets them all to go after the Jewish people. And he wants to kill them again. But for this glorious moment where the Pharaoh himself is now part of the process. He says, I'm sending you away. I want to help you leave. And that represents a marvelous transformational moment. So that's like the high following the low. There's the Yored Yeradnu, there's the low, there's the Anoicha Olcha Gam Olei. Where do you see it? Vayehi Beshalach Para Yasam. The Pharaoh sent the nation away, which is Tachlas Gili Ha'ir Liki. This is the highest level of what we would call divine revelation. Ukemavur, like it is explained in Lakota Torah, Be'inyan V'hachamishis Lepare. So I spent a fair bit of time trying to figure this out. It's like a lot of, it's an end of Parshas Pinchas. It's like a big chunk. This refers to like one line. Like it's not very explanatory there, but basically the point is that there are 4 levels of neshama: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and there's something called yechida. Yechida is the nuclear essence. So that's why on Yom Kippur we have 5 prayers, and the tefillah of ne'ilah corresponds to yechida, the highest level. So it says v'hachamishis lepare, the 5th that goes to pare, the koi al darga hachamishis, that refers to the 5th level. Shehi darga hachinailis, that represents the highest rung, the highest grade or level, if you will. And interestingly, the quintessence, which we in English tend to refer to the essence of something, it comes from Latin and Greek, in which it meant, quintessence meant the ethereal part of something, the heavenly, the spiritual part of something. Because they believed in 4 elements, and then they said there was a quintessence, there was a 5th, because quint means 5. And that 5th, they said, that's the ether, which was their word for, the stuff the gods are made of, the heavens made of. The point is, though, the 5th represents, the 5th dimension represents a leap beyond. It's not part of the frame. There's like, it's like you could say, like there's like, we live in a 4D world, a 3-dimensional world, right? And then there's that 4th dimension, but really the 3D world has 4 corners, right? And then there's a 5th corner, if you will. Like, that doesn't make any sense. You can't have a 5th corner, right? In our world, you can't, except they make holograms to describe it. But on a literal level, it's impossible, right? Like you have a kav, you have a line, so you have a beginning point and an end point, and that's a line. And then if you have a perpendicular line, a parallel line, and then 2 perpendicular lines joining them, what you did is you created a flat box, a rectangle, right? Now imagine you had a fifth element there somewhere. Maybe that's why the Romans and the Greeks used to revere the Pentagon. How many corners does it have? 6? 5 or 6? 5. Yeah. Anyway, the point, of course, here is that we speak ultimately of a darga hachinah, that's a very high level. So it is also with all the other Goliaths. This is, again, not just an Egypt thing. It's true the Pharaoh was king of Egypt, and the Pharaoh, that wasn't replicated in the other Galiot. Nebuchadnezzar was in Pharaoh, and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, the Yerida Legolus, the going down into Golus, is B'shvil Aliyah Hagadol Shel Achazet. It's for a tremendous elevation that comes afterward. Ukeshem Shu B'Yerida Legolus. Just like going down into Golus is for the purpose of an appropriate ascent. Now we're going to talk about the personal Golus. And the personal Golus is the neshama that got stuck in a body and doesn't know what hit it. How'd I end up here? Really? This was not the gold and silver they promised me, because the neshama got promised who knows what, because amazing mitzvahs and Torah. And he came here, he said, mitzvahs and Torah? I have a physical body that just wants food and sleep and is full of itself. So this is a big Yerida. And it's also L'Tzerich Aliyah. We all have a little Pharaoh inside us, a little taskmaster. He demands that we be addicted to materiality and so on and so forth. But you should know that the reason that the neshama comes down into the body, which seems to be a tremendous descent, is for the purpose of an enormous and a wondrous ascent by coming into this world and fulfilling the Torah and its mitzvahs. So this is the opening volley of the Maimer. There were actually some interesting fresh perspectives here introduced already, but this is a common theme. Now this Maimer is going to take a turn which is totally uncommon. And unless I'm making a mistake here, there is nothing like this anywhere in Chassidus. In fact, it usually says the opposite. Listen where this goes, because it's very interesting. Since through the efforts of the neshama in the body, and through the efforts of the Jewish people of Yisrael in Golus, we come to a great elevation. So moving is understood, it has to be that the service to God is being done joyously. Now, you don't think of gullus as a source of joy. Nobody says, I'm so happy to go to jail. Nobody's happy to go to jail. That's what the neshama feels like when in your body. He feels like he's in jail. Gullus it's gullus. Right? But here we have this notion of simcha v'tuv livav. Why? Because without joy, it's impossible to serve Hashem properly. In fact, you can't do anything really well if you're not happy about it, if you're not motivated. That's how the Alter Rebbe's whole thesis, why it's so important to serve Hashem with joy. He doesn't say it's a big mitzvah to be joyous, right? That says in L'Kutei Maharan, that's a mitzvah to be joyous. The Alter Rebbe says you can't serve Hashem fully unless you're joyous about it. If you don't find joy in what you're doing, you will not serve Hashem fully. It's just not possible. So, but what's the problem here? What's the problem? From this joy, which is which is beyond the typical rhyme and reason, beyond regular limitations. So whenever we have joy, we're afraid maybe we might come to a joy which is not appropriate. Because from joy we can come to levity. And from levity we can come to inappropriateness. There's an interesting halacha that during the Yom Tov, the Bezdin would make sure to send around shluchim to rein in the joy. Because sometimes too much joy can be a problem. And this is what's written. Here we go, Mitzrayim. But God says, no, don't take that road. Don't turn left. Go straight. Go round. Why? Because it's a land of Pelishtim. Okay, so it has this literal meaning. What does it mean proverbially? What does it mean spiritually? And the answer is that Pelishtim, hu miloshin mavi mefulish. The word Pelishtim comes from a terminology which is used in the Mishnah and Eruvin, where you have an alleyway. So there's two kinds of alleyways. There's what you call a cul-de-sac, which is a closed alleyway, but only opens on one side. So there's one methodology through which we can make it into a private domain, and that's through something called a lechi or a kaira, through a beam or through a crossbar. But then there's something called a mavi mefulish, and that has separate halachas. When you have two large thoroughfares, and you have a small alleyway that conjoins the thoroughfares and links directly into them, so then it's open on two sides. In other words, it's wide open. And wide open is a problem, because wide open means is room for everything and everybody. And not everything should be welcomed. You have to have the ability to have a door, to have a wall. Not everything is allowed in. There's certain things which are just inappropriate. And inappropriateness has to be kept at bay. The problem is, when it's wide open, anybody can come in. And that's a dangerous thing. So therefore, in order to protect innocent lives, we have to create walls and fences and doors and locks. So it shouldn't be wide open. And that's primarily what a Reshus HaYachid means, a private domain. Private domain for Hashem means that it's sealed, that we're protected. That's why there's a halacha that says if there's a home whose doors are wide open, and you came and installed doors, you actually can acquire the home through the installation of doors. Why? Because you may have walls, but if the doors are wide open, your walls don't serve to protect anybody. But if your doors are in place, now you're protected. So mavi mefulish means that it's wide open. And therefore, what is the land of Pelishtim? Pelishtim means ein mechitzas v'hagbalas. There's no limits. Everything goes. And when everything goes, hu inyan simcha shel hoylulus. This represents a joy, but not a joy that is holy, a joy that is vacuous, a joy that represents levity, a joy that represents lightheadedness, and ultimately sinful behavior. Things are too free. The mikivan sha'aveda b'simcha v'tuv levav, because the aveda is being done in a state of joy, we have to be concerned. Too much joy. So far this sounds like all the Maamarim, it says everywhere we have to rein in the joy, curb the joy, don't let the joy turn into something negative, something. But somehow the Rebbe turns this on its head now. On its head. And the Rebbe says, L'chein tzarech ezer milmayla, therefore we need help from on high. And help from on high is that the God positioning system says, turn left, or whatever, turn right, go round. God doesn't let us go to the land of Pelishtim. It shouldn't end up being Pelishtim of Klippa, the other side, the negative side. So now the Rebbe says, but don't think that this means that the Avodah now has to be reined in, that you have to serve Hashem in a measured way, that you have to serve Hashem in a limited way. Because, if it's unlimited, if it's wide open, if it's free-flowing, who knows where we'll end up? So therefore, bring it in, rein it in, fence it in. No, the Rebbe says, no, chas v'shalom, no, it doesn't mean that. That's not what it means. What it means is, despite everything, the service of Hashem is filled with joy. And it is untethered. And it's loosed. This is it's unbelievable. Everywhere it says you have to be protected from Plishtim. The Rebbe says, no, you have to be protected from Plishtim of Klippa. You have to have no medidiv agbala. You have to have no limitations. You have to be able take off like a gas balloon. You have to be able to break all the glass ceilings. Just make sure you do it in a holy way. Which is Lamaila medidiv agbala. This is the idea of Eretz Teva Rechava, a land which is broad and spacious. Rechava betachlas archava. Spacious means spacious, broad, open, no limitation. In other words, the Rebbe just turned this on his head. He just said that the idea, always we say, so we go into Mitzrayim, so much joy, you serve Hashem with joy, now be careful, rein it in. So the Rebbe says, so you do so much joy, make sure that when you're going to be limitless, when you're going to be entirely open, make sure it's open in a holy way. That's all. Don't rein it in. You should have archava, and it should be a tachas of archava. And it should be the most spacious and broad and wide. Break down all the walls. Everything wide open. Just make sure that you're doing it in a holy way. V'yesh lahisif, the Rebbe says we could add here. The late actually yeshna aveda shalamaylam didav agbala gam b'kedusha. Not only that there is an aveda of going beyond the rhyme, reason, or limits within the realm of holiness. That this service to Hashem, this limitless style, this freewheeling style, okay, this jazz service to Hashem, which doesn't have the strictures of a formal system in place. It's in such a way where everything is so overwhelmed with holiness that it's not even possible for it to go wrong. The possibility of inappropriateness is simply dissipated. Why? Because we're in such a great place. We're so intensely on fire in our Avodas Hashem. We've so broken out of the boundaries that it's not even possible. How could it go wrong? There is no enemy, so to speak. Like the Mittler Rebbe explains in the idea of Pada B'Shalom Nafshe, you know what real peace is? Not when you crush your enemy, not when you vanquish your enemy, not when you subdue your enemy, but rather when there is no enemy. When your enemies become your friend. When will this be? When will there be no enemies left? Exactly. Then it will be, it says, Shalom v'shaket yeh b'yamav. In his days, in Mashiach's days, everything will be peaceful. I know, amitis hashalom. Real peace means not that we're holding the peace. We're managing to keep the peace. If you have to keep the peace, it's not real peace. Real peace is where there's no possibility of anything but. The Inyan Zeb Pashtas Nemer Legabe Shlomo. This says about Shlomo. Avol Movin is understood. Gam Legabe Mashiach Tzidkenu, about Mashiach, ubefrat, and especially Al Pi Mashakasav Rambam. Mashiach here Mizera David Shlomo. The Rambam emphasizes in Shemona Prakim and in Sefer HaMitzvahs, he got his Teiman. He says Mashiach has to be from David Shlomo, and the emphasis is that the qualities that says about Shlomo HaMelech will be fully manifest when Mashiach will come. And that's the point that's being made. Zehu. This is Vayehi Beshalach Parei Samval Inacham Elikim Derech Eretz Pelishtim. This is, and it came to pass that the Pharaoh sent a nation, but they wouldn't go the way of Pelishtim. That means that Acharei Hayirido Legolus, that after the descent into Golus, we come to the great and wondrous ascent of the Pharaoh sending the nation. And from there we go to Eretz Tova Uruchava, to the open broad land, in a way of Linacham Derech Eretz Pelishtim. Hashem doesn't let it go south in a klipa way, but he lets it go free in a holy way. She'ein klal metzias shel menaged, that the end game is no enemy, no darkness left. Everything should be peace. Everything should be whole. This is a glimpse at the Rebbe's vision. The Rebbe's vision is not that there should be negativity reined in. The Rebbe's vision was there should be so much light it should be so good that the light simply disappears. The darkness disappears. All there is light. It's all good. It's like the joy of Simchas Torah, which has no boundaries. And even in super firm shows, the mechitza comes down because we have nothing to worry about, because it's Simchas Torah. Because it's so beyond Medida v'Agbala in a holy way that we're not concerned of things going wrong, that we have to rein in. It says similar things about Purim. We're not afraid because it's Purim, because it's so holy, because it resonates with such force and profundity and power that there is no enemy. And that's the Beshalach Parei Yisraelim, and that's the V'linochem Derech Eretz Pelishtim, not to rein him in, like it says everywhere. No, it's that Lochem Derech Eretz Pelishtim means not to go the Pelishtim of Klippa. And this is the first half of the Maimer. In the second half of the Maimer, the Rebbe augments this, and he explains it and develops a whole, like a secondary thesis which kind of undergirds the whole thing. And he finishes off with a hope and prayer that all this should be fulfilled in the most literal way, with the divine revelation that will, the Mertza Hashem, resonate, and the 10th song that we will together sing with the coming of Mashiach, when the third Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt speedily in our days. Amen. Thank you all for joining us all week. Good Shabbos, everybody, and may we meet in the Beis HaMikdash.